My name is Claire. I'm 33 years old. And exactly 1 month ago, at my father's retirement gala in downtown Hartford, Connecticut, he gave me the most publicly humiliating moment of my entire life. And in doing so, unintentionally handed me the one gift he never meant to give me, my complete and total freedom. Let me paint the picture for you. A grand hotel ballroom, the kind with 30-foot ceilings and chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. 300 guests in evening wear, seated at tables dressed in white linen and candlelight. A full catering staff weaving through the crowd. An open bar doing brisk business. The warm, self-congratulatory hum of a room full of people who have spent decades in each other's professional orbit, gathered tonight to celebrate one man's career, and more honestly, to be seen celebrating it. My father, Gerald Whitmore, founder and CEO of Whitmore Freight Solutions, was retiring after 38 years at the helm of the company he had built from the ground up. A single leased truck and a cold warehouse in the industrial part of town turned over nearly 4 decades into a regional freight empire with over 400 employees, dozens of carrier relationships, and annual revenue in the tens of millions. He had worked hard. He had been, by most external measures, extraordinarily successful. Tonight was his night, his legacy, his triumphant last curtain call, and he intended to enjoy every second of it. I arrived alone, wearing a midnight blue gown I'd had for 2 years, understated, well-fitted, expensive in the quiet way that doesn't announce itself with a logo. My maternal grandmother's watch, which had come to me through a trust I'll explain in detail later. A structured bag I'd bought for myself after my company's first $1 million revenue year, as a private acknowledgement of a promise I had kept. I had dressed not to impress anyone in that room, but to feel entirely, unapologetically myself inside of it. My stepmother, Diana, intercepted me near the entrance. She's one of those women who has perfected the art of the warm greeting that is actually a surveillance sweep. Her eyes did a full, rapid inventory of my appearance while her face performed delight at seeing me. "Claire, you made it," she said, as though my presence were a pleasant surprise and a mild inconvenience simultaneously. "We weren't entirely sure you'd have the right thing to wear." I told her she looked lovely and kept moving. My assigned table was number 16, near the kitchen entrance. I noted the geography of it in the same way you note a weather forecast, not with rage, just with information that confirms what you already knew about the forecast. Over the course of the evening, I moved quietly through the room, doing what I have been doing my entire adult life. Watching, listening, staying out of sight while absorbing everything. My father was holding court near the bar with a cluster of freight industry veterans, the kind of men who have been to 1,000 of these events and could talk logistics economics in their sleep. I positioned myself close enough to listen without being noticed. "Apex Logistics Solutions has been transformative for us," my father was saying to a silver-haired man I recognized as a senior executive from one of the country's largest national carriers. "Whoever built that operation is exceptional. Genuinely exceptional. We've been working with them for 3 years and they've restructured our entire cost architecture. I've been trying to get a meeting with their leadership for over a year," the carrier executive said, shaking his head. "Very private outfit. Do you know who's behind it?" My father shrugged, satisfied with his ignorance. "Never met them in person. Everything goes through their legal team and account managers, but I don't care who they are as long as the results keep coming." I raised my champagne glass slightly in my father's direction from across the room, in a gesture that no one saw. Then I lowered it, turned to look out the tall ballroom windows at the city lights outside, and allowed myself a long, private moment of feeling everything that was. My stepbrother Nate found me on the terrace about an hour later. He had been drinking since before I arrived. His particular brand of contempt was visible and slick with it. He came up behind me in the cool September air and said, with the weary superiority he had been practicing since childhood, "Surprised you bothered to come." "Here I am," I said without turning around. He stepped beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive that had been a gift, I suspected, from my father. "Still doing whatever it is you do up in New Haven?" he asked. "Still playing at the whole business thing?" I turned and looked at him. My stepbrother in his bespoke suit and his inherited confidence, his Rolex, his entire life built on a foundation that had been partly constructed with money that should have been mine. And I thought about everything I knew that he didn't. "I think you'll find out about the business thing eventually," I said. He laughed with the effortless dismissiveness of someone who has never had to take you seriously and went back inside. The lights dimmed about 20 minutes later. The program began. A polished MC introduced my father to thunderous applause. Gerald Whitmore climbed the stage steps with the comfort of a man who has never felt unwelcome in any room he has entered, and he stood behind that podium and he spoke. I will not walk you through the entire speech. It was long, self-congratulatory in the well-practiced executive way, and punctuated throughout by the kind of gratitude that is really just a more polished form of credit claiming. He thanked his board, his leadership team, his employees, his business partners, his God, his luck. He thanked Diana, who dabbed her eyes precisely on cue. He called Nate up to the stage and introduced him as the future of Whitmore Freight, the culmination of everything he had built, the next chapter of the family legacy, and the room gave Nate a standing ovation, and Nate waved like a man who has been rehearsing that wave. And then my father's eyes found me at table 16. Something shifted in his expression, something that had the shape of warmth but the temperature of something colder. And over there, he said with a slight, almost fond gesture in my direction, is my daughter Claire. Bless her, she's never quite figured out what she wanted to be when she grew up. He let the pause breathe just long enough. But she showed up tonight, which is honestly more than I expected. Maybe there's still time. He followed it with a chuckle, warm, paternal, the universal signal that this is all in good fun. Just a little gentle ribbing from a father who loves his daughter. Nothing to take too seriously here. 300 people laughed. Some of them looked over at me with the particular combination of pity and curiosity that a punchline earns for its subject. Some of them weren't paying close enough attention to fully register what had just been said. But enough of them were. I sat still through all of it, every second. I let the laughter move through the room and begin to die down. I let the silence that followed the laughter start to settle. And then I stood up. I don't know that I had decided exactly before that moment. But something in me had been building toward it for 11 years. And when my legs straightened and I rose from my chair at table 16, it felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability. Like water finally finding a way through a wall that had been holding it back for a very long time. The room noticed. The last of the polite laughter faded. 300 pairs of eyes shifted from the stage to me, and the silence became the kind of silence that holds its breath. I picked up my champagne flute. I held it toward my father across the full width of that ballroom. "Congratulations on everything you built, Dad," I said. My voice was clear and even and carried easily to every corner of the room. "And on everything you didn't see." I set the glass down. I picked up my bag, and I walked out. The heels of my shoes on that marble floor were the only sound in the entire room. 35 feet to the double doors. Not rushed, not hurried. Just steady, deliberate steps. Spine straight, shoulders level, head up. Like someone who has somewhere important to be and knows exactly how to get there. I pushed through the doors and stepped out into the cool September night, and I kept walking until I reached my car and I got in and I closed the door and I put my hands in my lap and I breathed. And for the first time in longer than I could honestly remember, I felt entirely, unquestionably free. Before I continue, I need to take you back, because you cannot understand what that moment meant without understanding how we got there. So let me tell you about the Whitmore family of Hartford, Connecticut, and about the 12 years that preceded that night. Part 1. The family I was born into. My father built his freight company from a place of genuine ambition. I want to acknowledge that honestly, because it matters to the full picture. He started in his late 20s with borrowed capital, a leased truck, a small warehouse, and a relentless work ethic that I genuinely admired for most of my childhood. By the time I was born, the company was established and profitable. By the time I was old enough to understand what he did for a living, Whitmore Freight was one of the largest regional freight operations in New England. We lived well. A large colonial home in a gated community in West Hartford, private school from kindergarten. A country club membership that represented, for my father, not just leisure but social infrastructure. The Whitmore name meant something in the Hartford business community, and my father was very much aware of that fact and very invested in protecting it. My mother was quieter than my father, a librarian who loved gardening, mystery novels, and cooking elaborate Sunday dinners. She had a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying was the most interesting thing she had heard all day, whether you were describing your first-grade classroom drama or a problem she had been helping you think through for weeks. She died when I was 9 years old. An aneurysm. There one morning, gone before afternoon, in the specific and devastating way that some losses happen, without any of the preparation that still wouldn't have been enough. I have thought about my mother almost every day since she died. I have thought about the versions of my life that would have existed if she had lived. I try not to let that thinking go on too long, because it leads somewhere dark, but sometimes I can't help it. My father remarried when I was 11. Deanna had been, in her previous career, an event planner, which explains both her impeccable organizational precision and her instinctive prioritization of how things appear over how they actually are. She was not a cruel woman, in any direct or deliberate sense. She was simply a woman who had come into a family with a son and had, entirely naturally, organized her considerable energies around that son's well-being. The fact that there was another child in the house, me, who had different needs and different ways of being seen, was something Diana handled through the most efficient possible mechanism. She didn't handle it at all. My stepbrother Nate was 4 years older than me, confident, socially fluent, and deeply, perhaps genuinely, uninterested in my existence. He did not bully me. He did something that I have come to understand is in some ways worse. He simply treated me as irrelevant, background noise, the kind of sibling presence you tolerate without ever truly registering. My father, for his part, operated within this new family arrangement in the way that I suspect he approached most things. Efficiently, with a clear internal hierarchy of priorities, and with relatively little attention to the emotional undercurrents running beneath the surface. Nate was male, older, already showing the kind of direct confidence and commercial instinct my father recognized and valued. I was younger, quieter, more bookish, and more inclined toward the kind of careful, analytical thinking that is deeply useful in business, but does not advertise itself the way brash confidence does. What resulted was not a dramatic, documentable pattern of mistreatment. It was something quieter and more pervasive, a steady, consistent redirection of parental attention, financial resources, and expressed hope away from me and toward Nate. Every academic achievement of mine was acknowledged with a brief nod and redirected to commentary about Nate. When Nate turned 16 and got a brand new car, I turned 16 and got driving lessons and a politely worded suggestion that I be grateful for them. When Nate's college applications became a household event, campus visits, consultants, conversations over dinner about programs and rankings, my college applications were handled mostly by me, at the kitchen table, with a library book about financial aid. I want to say something about the particular damage of being raised in an environment where the neglect is quiet, where no one can point to a specific incident and say, that was the moment. Where the harm is distributed across 1,000 small redirections, 1,000 moments of being looked past, 1,000 conversations where your name came up as an afterthought and was then dropped in favor of something more pressing. That kind of harm is very hard to articulate and very easy to internalize as your own deficiency. I spent most of my teens and early 20s believing, on some level, that I simply was not as interesting or as worthy as my stepbrother. Not because anyone had said it explicitly, but because the cumulative weight of being treated that way is very difficult to separate from belief. It took a long time, and a lot of work, to understand that the problem had never been mine. There was one person in my life who saw me clearly. My maternal grandmother, Ruth Hargrove, my mother's mother, who lived 40 minutes away in an older house full of books and plants, and the particular warm disorder of someone who has prioritized living well over living tidily. She called every Sunday without fail. She asked about my classes, my friendships, what I was reading, what I was thinking about, what I wanted for myself. She argued with my father on my behalf, I later learned, in conversations I was never present for and never knew about until after she was gone. She used to say to me on those Sunday calls, "You have your mother's stubbornness, Claire, and I mean that as the highest compliment. Don't let anyone sand it down." I held on to that, more than she knew. In my junior year of college, I had gotten into a state university 2 hours from home, taken out loans, worked part-time, and was carrying a 3.7 GPA in supply chain management and operations. my father called me home for a weekend meeting. Those words, family meeting, had always been weighted in our household. They never meant anything good. I sat across from him in his study, Diana at his shoulder, Nate's acceptance letter to a prestigious MBA program sitting on the desk between us. "We're going to need you to take a leave of absence," my father said. He did not meet my eyes when he said it. "The MBA program is expensive. We need to prioritize our resources. Nate's career will benefit the entire family in the long run." I said, "You promised you would pay for my education. You made that promise when Mom died." My father said, "Circumstances change. We'll revisit your situation when the business stabilizes." He never revisited it. What I found out years later, through my Uncle Patrick, my father's younger brother, who had spent most of his adult life in a quiet, self-protective estrangement from the family, was this. My mother, before she died, had established an educational trust in my name. A separate account, specifically designated for my college education, containing enough to fund 4 full years at any university in the country. She had done this because she had known, with the particular clarity of someone who loves someone deeply and also sees them clearly, that my father would need structure and explicit instruction to ensure her daughter was provided for. My father had used that money to fund Nate's MBA. He had drained my mother's trust, spent what she had set aside for her daughter's future on a stepson's professional advancement, and then sat across from me in his mahogany-paneled study and told me that circumstances had changed. I didn't know any of this at 21. What I knew was that I was being told my future was less important than my stepbrother's, and that the parent who was supposed to protect me had chosen not to. I drove back to campus, packed my belongings into 2 bags and a storage unit, and moved to New Haven with $1,800, a rented room in a shared house, and a single clear promise to myself. I would never again let someone else write the verdict on my worth. Part 2. 11 years in the dark, I am going to tell you about the next 11 years as honestly as I can, which means telling you both the version that is inspiring and the version that is real. They are not entirely different stories, but they are not exactly the same one either. The inspiring version. A young woman, wronged by her family and stripped of her educational foundation, bootstraps her way through entry-level jobs, teaches herself an industry, starts a company, and builds a quiet empire from nothing. That version is true. The real version includes 17 months of near poverty in New Haven, eating the cheapest groceries at the back of the store and rationing the cost of my phone plan. A supervisor who presented my work as his own for the better part of a year before I understood that I needed to start building something he couldn't take. A stretch of about 6 months where I went to sleep genuinely uncertain whether I had made the right choice in not going home, not calling my father, not accepting whatever terms of reintegration might have been available to me. That version is also true. What got me through the real version, honestly, was the thing my grandmother had always told me I had. My mother's stubbornness, and a fierce, almost consuming interest in the specific mechanics of how supply chains worked, where money disappeared between origin and destination, why certain routing decisions were costing certain companies amounts they didn't even know they were losing, what a better designed system might look like. I could not stop thinking about these problems. They were, in a strange way, a refuge. When I was thinking hard about logistics inefficiencies at 10 o'clock at night with a library textbook and a cup of instant coffee, I was not thinking about my father. That was its own kind of relief. I got a job as an inventory coordinator at a regional distribution company within my first year in New Haven. Low pay, repetitive work, a supervisor with a large ego and a limited grasp of the systems he was supposed to be managing. I stayed late. I learned every process I could observe. I enrolled in every free online course I could find, open university platforms, free MIT courseware, industry certification programs that cost under $100. I became very good at seeing systems the way architects see buildings, not just as they currently exist, but as they could exist if designed with more intention. About 14 months into that job, I quietly redesigned the company's outbound carrier routing. I didn't announce it. I ran the projections, built the documentation, laid it all out with a clarity that required no interpretation, and left it on my supervisor's desk one morning without ceremony. When the restructure was implemented and the savings materialized, approximately $190,000 in the first year, my supervisor presented it to leadership as his own work. I was not in the meeting. I was not credited. What I was, instead, was educated. I understood something very clearly after that. I was not going to be seen in someone else's structure. I was going to have to build my own. At 25, I started Apex Logistics Solutions, LLC, a freelance consulting operation run out of a desk in a shared co-working space with a professional services email address, a contracted legal team, and my name nowhere on any of the public-facing materials. No website biography, no LinkedIn profile, no press releases, no conference panels or industry quotes. All communications went through representatives. I kept myself invisible deliberately. The invisibility had been imposed on me for most of my life. I had decided to reclaim it as strategy rather than continue experiencing it as wound. Some people build empires loudly. I built mine in the background, and I became very, very good at it. Those early years of running Apex were a particular kind of demanding that I do not think I fully understood until they were behind me. There is a specific exhaustion that comes with managing a growing business, while simultaneously managing the emotional weight of having built it entirely alone, without a network, without a family phone call you can make when something goes wrong, without the particular safety net that most people in business don't realize they have until it isn't there. I made mistakes. I hired the wrong person twice in my first 18 months and had to have two very uncomfortable conversations. I lost a client in my second year to a competitor who underbid us significantly and lost money doing it. I spent 6 weeks rebuilding a financial model at midnight after discovering my original projections had a structural error that would have created a real problem 18 months down the line. What I did not do during any of it was call my father. I want to be honest about why, because I think people sometimes assume the answer is pride or stubbornness. And while both of those things are probably partially true, the more accurate answer is simpler. My father had made very clear, through the accumulation of choices across my entire childhood and young adulthood, that my success was not something he was invested in. Calling him in a moment of difficulty would not have produced help. It would have produced something that looked like help while costing me something I could not afford to pay, probably my sense of my own competence, probably the narrative I needed to keep believing to keep going, possibly both. So I kept going without calling anyone who shared my last name. And eventually, the keeping going became its own foundation. The clients grew slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. A regional grocery distributor, a mid-sized e-commerce fulfillment company, a cold chain pharmaceutical shipper that required a level of precision and documentation I found deeply satisfying to provide. Each contract built the next one. The reputation grew entirely through referral and results, never through promotion or visibility. By 28, Apex had 8 full-time employees, revenue well over $2 million, and a growing reputation in logistics consulting circles as an unusually sharp and unusually private operation. By 30, Apex had 12 employees, revenue approaching $3.5 million, and a new contract from a client my CFO Marcus Chen had flagged in an RFP that crossed his desk one Tuesday morning. The client was Whitmore Freight Solutions. Marcus knew the outline of my history. He knew I kept my name off everything. He set the RFP on my desk and said simply, "This one's entirely your call. I won't push either way." I took 4 days to decide. In the end, the decision was more straightforward than the emotion around it. Whitmore Freight was a well-structured company with a clearly solvable inefficiency problem and the financial capacity to pay for the solution. Their internal routing and carrier management systems were outdated by at least half a decade. Their warehouse operations were bleeding money in ways their existing team could not see clearly, partly because they were too close to it, and partly because they did not have the analytical framework to identify it. It was, from a pure business perspective, exactly the kind of engagement Apex was built for. The fact that my father ran it, and that he would never know who was solving his problems, was a complication I chose to sit alongside rather than let drive the decision. We signed a 3-year service agreement. The contract went through my legal team. All ongoing communications were handled by my account managers and operations leads. No one at Whitmore Freight ever met the ownership of Apex Logistics Solutions. My father paid my company's invoices, praised my company's work at industry events, and continued to have no idea that the daughter he had written off was the backbone of his operational success. I heard about the conference quote, "Whoever built that operation is exceptional," secondhand from Marcus, several months after it happened. I saved it to a folder on my desktop. The folder was titled simply, Evidence. Part 3, the retirement gala and what came after the invitation arrived 6 weeks before the event. Thick cream card stock, embossed lettering, a formal request for my presence at the retirement celebration of Gerald Whitmore. I want to be honest about why I decided to go. It wasn't hope, not the naive, vulnerable kind that had got me hurt so many times in my 20s. I was long past hoping that my father would see me the way I needed to be seen. What I had instead was a very clear-eyed certainty. Given a stage and 300 witnesses, my father would almost certainly do what he had always done, which was use me as the contrast that made his success story more flattering. And if that was going to happen, I was not going to be absent from it. I was going to be there, entirely intact, so that whatever happened in that room happened to a version of me who knew exactly who she was. Everything that followed, the table near the kitchen, Diana's inventory disguised as a greeting, Nate's drink-loosened contempt on the terrace, my father's speech, and the laughter that filled that ballroom when he called me his daughter who had never figured it out. All of it unfolded more or less exactly as I had expected it might, which did not make it painless. I want to be clear about that, too. Understanding that cruelty is coming does not make the impact of it land any softer. I sat through my father's speech, and I felt every second of those 300 people laughing at the punchline he had made of me, and it hurt. Of course it hurt. These were not strangers. But I had made a promise to myself, standing in a parking lot 6 weeks earlier when I first opened that invitation. I was not going to leave that room the way I had left every other room in my family's world, quietly, invisibly, swallowing it down. I stood up. I raised my glass. I said what I said. And I walked out. By the time I reached my car, my phone had already started buzzing with the first of what would become a cascade of missed calls and text messages. That night, I let them all go to voicemail. I drove to my hotel, ordered room service, ran a bath, and spent 2 hours in hot water thinking about everything that was and everything that was going to happen next. Because there was still the matter of the contract. Part 4, the truth, the trust, and the letter my maternal grandmother Ruth Hargrove died 4 years ago. She was 81 years old and had been, for my entire life, the person in my family who saw me most clearly and most consistently. Her death was a grief I am still, honestly, processing in pieces. 3 days after her funeral, which I attended, sitting quietly in the back of the church, mostly unnoticed, I received a call from her attorney, a Boston estate lawyer named Vivienne Park. Vivienne told me that my grandmother had established a separate discretionary trust in my name 8 years before her death. She had been explicitly clear in her instructions that no other family member was to be informed of its existence. The trust contained $750,000. There was also a letter. Vivienne read it to me over the phone. I sat on the floor of my apartment with my back against the couch, and I listened to my grandmother's words coming through a phone speaker, and I did not bother trying not to cry. She wrote that she knew what my father had done with my mother's educational trust. She wrote that she had confronted him directly, more than once, and that he had denied it, and that she had never trusted him with anything after that. She wrote that the money was mine without conditions or expectations. She wrote that she had watched me build something from nothing, and that she had been prouder of me with every passing year than she could find adequate words to express. She wrote that the life I was building was worth every struggle I had put into it, and that she was sorry she could not have done more sooner. And she ended with something I have thought about almost every day since. When they finally understand your worth, sweetheart, it will be too late for them to claim any credit for it. That is not cruelty. That is simply justice moving at its own pace. I used a portion of that trust to significantly expand Apex. Better technology, new hires, improved infrastructure, an upgraded office space. The rest I held as the kind of security that lets you make business decisions from clarity rather than fear. The kind of security that means you do not have to accept bad terms because you cannot afford the alternative. When I drove away from that retirement gala, I already knew that the Whitmore freight contract was coming up for renewal. My team had been in quiet extension discussions with their operations leadership for several weeks. They wanted 5 more years, upgraded terms, a meaningful increase in contract value. They were, as Marcus put it in his dry way, clearly motivated. After the gala, I told Marcus to pause all discussions. I spent 4 days thinking about what kind of person I wanted to be. There is a version of what happened next that could have been purely retaliatory. Terminate the contract, maximize the damage, let my father's company feel every consequence of what he had built on the foundation of dismissing me. That version had an appeal I won't pretend I didn't feel. I had been patient and invisible for 11 years. I had watched my father praise my work without knowing it was mine. I had $750,000 in a trust my grandmother had left specifically because she knew my father would try to take anything of mine he could reach. But I kept returning to what my grandmother had actually said. Justice working on its own timeline, not me engineering a collapse. Just me stepping back, being honest, and letting the truth do what the truth inevitably does when it is finally told. I asked Marcus to draft the formal termination notice. 30 days per contract terms, professional language, strategic repositioning of our client portfolio. No accusations, no personal content, nothing that could be challenged or misconstrued. Clean, clear, legally bulletproof. And separately, I sat down at my kitchen table on a Sunday evening with a cup of tea and a blank document, and I wrote my father a letter. It took most of the evening. The early drafts were too long, too sharp, too full of everything I had been holding for years. I kept stripping them back until what remained was simple and clear and true. The final letter said, I own Apex Logistics Solutions. I have for 7 years. 3 years ago, your company signed a service contract with mine. The operational improvements you have called transformative, the work you described as exceptional at last year's industry conference. That work was produced by the daughter you introduced to 300 people as a failure who never figured out what she wanted to be. I am ending the contract not as retaliation, but as a boundary I am drawing around my professional and personal life. My grandmother left me a trust fund you knew nothing about, specifically because she knew what you did with my mother's educational trust, and she wanted to ensure you could not reach what was mine. I don't require an apology. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to know the truth. Please don't contact me again. I signed it with my full legal name, Claire Ruth Whitmore. The middle name was my grandmother's. I had added it legally 2 years earlier. I wanted him to see it. I included a photocopy of Apex's incorporation papers, my name printed clearly as sole owner. The package went out by courier first thing Monday morning. Part 5. The fallout by 10 a.m. that Monday, my phone had received 4 missed calls from my father's number. By 11, I had calls from Nate's number and Diana's. By noon, 14 missed calls total, 8 text messages escalating from clipped and demanding to genuinely desperate. I answered none of them. What I learned later, from my Uncle Patrick, was that the scene in the Whitmore Freight boardroom that Monday morning had been something close to devastating. My father's CFO had been tracking the unanswered contract extension requests for several weeks with mounting concern. He had prepared a contingency impact analysis that made for very uncomfortable reading. When my father arrived at the office that morning to what should have been a routine post-retirement transition check-in, and instead found the termination notice alongside my personal letter, the resulting conversation was, Patrick told me quietly, unlike anything the company had witnessed in years. My father was 1 week into his retirement. Nate had assumed the CEO role 4 weeks prior. Neither of them had had time to build any significant standing to absorb what was coming. Whitmore Freight's routing systems, their warehouse management protocols, their carrier relationship management, all of it had been restructured and optimized around Apex's frameworks over 3 years. It was deeply integrated. You don't extricate something like that in 30 days. You don't replace it at quality in 60. What followed the termination was, by every available account, a period of significant operational deterioration. By Thursday of that week, they drove to Boston. My assistant called my office at 2 in the afternoon. There are 3 members of your family in the lobby, she said carefully. They say it's urgent. I took a few minutes. I straightened my blazer. I thought about my grandmother's handwriting on that letter, the confidence she had carried in me for 20 years. And I asked my assistant to show them to conference room C, the one with glass walls and a full view of the open-plan office, where my 13 employees were working quietly at their desks. They were standing at the far end of the room when I entered. My father, Diana, Nate. My father looked genuinely like a smaller version of himself than the man who had stood behind that podium a week earlier. The particular compression that happens to people when the ground shifts under their certainties had settled into the set of his shoulders. "Claire," he said. He had started to say the wrong name and corrected himself. "Hello, Dad," I said. I sat down at the head of the conference table. The next hour was the most honest conversation our family had ever had, which, as I said it to my therapist later, may not be as high a bar as it should be. My father began with the predictable sequences: denial, recasting, negotiation. He tried several angles of approach before arriving at what was most authentic to him, which was transactional. What did I want? What would it take? Could we discuss terms for a continuation? He was still thinking about this as a business problem to be solved, which, in fairness, is what he is, a man who has spent 40 years solving business problems and rather fewer years solving anything else. Nate moved between fury and something he clearly found very unfamiliar, which was genuine fear. He understood the operational implications more clearly than his father did, and he lacked the older man's experience at masking that understanding behind executive composure. At one point, he slammed his palm on the table and called what I was doing sick, a calculated years-long revenge operation, a betrayal of the family. I told him quietly that I had built a company, that his company had chosen to become dependent on mine, and that neither of those facts constituted betrayal on my part. Diana said almost nothing throughout. She sat with the careful, watchful composure of someone who has spent decades reading rooms and waiting to see which way they move before committing. I told my father I knew about my mother's educational trust. I watched his face when I said it, and I saw clearly, unmistakably, the specific kind of stillness that comes over a person when something they believed was buried surfaces in broad daylight. He did not deny it. He simply sat with it, and I understood from his silence that he had been carrying the knowledge of what he had done for a long time. I told him I was not there to negotiate a contract extension. I told him I was not interested in a reconciliation that required me to minimize what had happened between us. I told him that I had already built the life he told me I couldn't have, that I had built it entirely without him, and that I intended to continue building it without him. "You're going to destroy everything I spent 40 years building," he said. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. For a moment, a brief and honest moment, he sounded less like my father the CEO and more like my father the person, uncertain, frightened, reduced. "I'm going to run my company," I said. "What happens to yours is not something I'm responsible for." When they stood to leave, my father stopped in front of me in the doorway. We looked at each other for a long moment, father and daughter, two people who have shared a last name and very little else for the last 11 years. "Do you hate us?" he asked. The question was almost stripped of performance. "No," I said, and I meant it. "I just don't need you anymore." "That's something you'll need to learn to live with." He had nothing to say to that. The three of them walked out through the lobby, past the glass walls, past my employees who carefully didn't watch. The front doors closed behind them. I went back to my desk. I opened my laptop. I returned 12 emails, approved 2 proposals, reviewed a quarterly report, and got back to work. Part 6. What came after, and what I learned. I want to be honest with you about the weeks and months that followed, because I think the honest version is more useful than the triumphant one. Whitmore Freight announced workforce reductions about 8 weeks after our contract ended. 73 employees let go before the holidays. The official press release cited market conditions and strategic restructuring. The Connecticut business community is small and interconnected enough that people knew what had actually happened. And the story that circulated: CEO spends 40 years building a company partly on the invisible labor of the daughter he dismissed publicly. Daughter terminates the contract 1 week after his retirement, was not a story that reflected well on my father. Word traveled in the particular way that word travels in tight-knit professional communities, which is quickly and with accumulating embellishment. I heard, through Patrick, that my father had emerged from his retirement to help Nate manage the crisis, that the standing ovation at the retirement gala had become, by most accounts, the last uncomplicated moment in his professional legacy. That at a regional industry event some months later, Gerald Whitmore sat largely alone. I am telling you this not because I felt satisfied by it. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was a complicated, layered grief, not for my father exactly, but for the versions of events that had never happened and now never would. For the life where my mother had lived, and the money she'd left for my education had been honored, and I had finished college and built my career with the foundational support I was supposed to have. For the family I had wanted and had never been given. I started seeing a therapist 6 months after the gala. Her name is Dr. Ananya Mehta, and she has a calm, methodical intelligence that I found, to my surprise, enormously useful. We talked about the years of accumulated invisible damage, about the strange identity complexity of building success in secret, of being simultaneously very powerful within my professional life and entirely unacknowledged within my family. About the difference between closure and resolution, and why one is possible and the other largely isn't. We talked about grief, too, specifically, the particular and complicated grief of estranging yourself from living people. It is not the same as losing someone to death. It is not clean. There are no rituals built around it, no casseroles delivered to your door, no socially sanctioned period of acknowledged loss. You make a decision to stop having a relationship with someone, and then you have to keep making that decision every day, when the holidays come around, and when you drive past a place that holds a memory, and when someone asks casually about your family, and you have to decide again how much truth to offer and to whom. It is its own kind of labor, and I think it is important to name that honestly rather than frame it purely as liberation, even though liberation is also genuinely part of what it is. Do you regret the way it ended? Dr. Mehta asked me in one of our early sessions. I thought about it for a long time before answering. No, I said finally. I regret that it was necessary. She nodded. That's a very honest answer, she said. We sat with it for a while. Something I have come to understand in the months since is that the freedom I felt walking out of that ballroom was real. It was genuine. It was earned. It was mine. And it was also just the beginning of a much longer process of figuring out who I am when I am not defined by my relationship to people who underestimated me. Identity built in opposition to something is still, partly, defined by that thing. Becoming fully myself, outside the shadow of the family I grew up in, is work that I am still doing. I suspect it will take longer than a year. I am learning to be patient with the pace of it. My Uncle Patrick and I have dinner once a month now. He is an artist, large-scale abstract paintings, a studio full of controlled chaos, and the opposite of my father in almost every measurable way. He tells me about my mother. The real version of her, not the sanitized memory my father kept preserved in photographs and careful anecdotes. She was, Patrick tells me, stubborn and perceptive and fiercely, almost stubbornly independent. She had a very low tolerance for people who underestimated her or tried to contain what she was capable of. She built things. She fought for what she believed was true. She would have been, Patrick says, watching me across a restaurant table with something that looks like recognition, exactly like this. I visit my grandmother's grave when I can. Yellow flowers, her favorite. I stand there for a few minutes and tell her what is happening in my life, the way you tell someone who is listening even when you cannot hear them respond. I did it, I told her last spring. I stood there in the wind and the cemetery quiet and I told her. I didn't let them decide what I was worth. The trees moved. Light shifted through the leaves. I think if I listened carefully, I could almost hear her voice. I know, sweetheart, I always knew you would. Part 7. What this story is really about here is the truth I want to leave you with. Your worth has never lived in a degree. It has never lived in your family's approval, in whether the people who were supposed to see you first chose to see you at all, in whether someone stood up at a podium and acknowledged what you built. Your worth is not a credential that can be revoked by people who were never qualified to issue it in the first place. Your worth lives in what you construct when no one is watching, in who you become when you are given nothing and have to find your own materials. In the life you build with the resources you actually have, under the conditions that actually exist, rather than the ones you deserved and were not given. My father believed, I think, that he was putting me in my place that night in the ballroom. He believed he was performing a gentle, affectionate family truth for an appreciative crowd. The wayward daughter, the harmless contrast that made his son's ascent all the more impressive, the footnote that confirmed rather than complicated his narrative. He had been performing that version of our family story for years, at dinners and events and casual conversations, and no one had ever contradicted it. What he did not know, standing behind that podium with his champagne and his 300 witnesses, was that the footnote had been building a company that was keeping his business operational for the last 3 years. What he could not have anticipated was that the person he had written off would walk out of his retirement gala with her spine straight and her head up, in front of those same 300 witnesses, and that the silence she left behind her would be the kind that stays with people. I did not plan any of it to hurt him. I want you to understand that, because it matters to the kind of story this actually is. I built Apex Logistics Solutions because I was good at the work, and because the work needed doing, and because I needed to prove to myself, not to him, to myself, that the verdict he had issued on my life was not the final word. The contract with Whitmore Freight was a business decision, not a revenge plot. The termination of that contract was a boundary, not a weapon. The truth did what it did entirely on its own. I did not need to manufacture a collapse. I simply needed to stop being invisible. Boundaries are not punishments. They are not cruelty in a more sophisticated costume. They are honest acknowledgments that certain relationships in their current form cost more than they give, and that you are allowed to stop paying that particular price on your own life. If you are in a family that has made you the background character in someone else's success story, that has cast your potential as either invisible or inconvenient, that has consistently spent its resources and attention and expressed pride everywhere, but on you, I want you to hear this as clearly as I can say it. The verdict they've issued about you is not a verdict. It is a limitation of their vision. And their limited vision has nothing to do with what you are capable of building. I spent 11 years constructing a life they told me I couldn't have. I did it without resources I was owed, without the educational foundation that was stolen from me, without approval or acknowledgement or the basic respect of being seen. I built it with stubbornness and curiosity and the steady faith of one woman who called me every Sunday and told me she could see exactly who I was and what I was going to become. Find your grandmother. Find the person in your life, whether they share your blood or whether you chose each other, who looks at you with clear, unhurried eyes and believes in what they see without requiring you to earn it. Those people are worth more than any inheritance, more than any credential, more than any moment of public acknowledgement. They are the foundation that everything else gets built on. And when the moment comes, and it will come in some form for all of us when someone uses you as their punchline, when someone stands at a podium and performs your limitations for an audience, stand up, say your piece, walk out with your whole self intact. That is not a dramatic exit. That is not revenge. That is someone who has finally, completely, unambiguously arrived at the understanding of who she is, and who is making sure that the people who underestimated her understand it too. My name is Claire Ruth Whitmore. I am 33 years old. I own a company with 14 employees, a growing client portfolio, and an office with harbor views in the city I chose for myself. My grandmother believed in me before I believed in myself, and she left me the resources and the reminder to use them with intention. I am, at last, entirely free. There is something I want to add here, at the end, that I did not know how to say earlier in this story, but that feels important to say now. For a long time, I measured my success privately against my family's version of who I was. The degree I didn't have, the tuition that was taken, my father's voice calling me a failure in front of his guests. These things lived in me not just as memories, but as motives. I built Apex Logistics Solutions partly out of genuine passion for the work, and partly, if I am being fully honest, out of a very deep and very human need to prove something to someone, even if that someone never knew the proof existed. What I have come to understand, in therapy and in quiet evenings, and in the monthly dinners with my Uncle Patrick, and in the moments I stand at my grandmother's grave and feel the weight of her faith in me, what I have come to understand is that building something to prove a point and building something because you love it are not mutually exclusive. Both things were true for me. Both things drove me to the work. And the work was real, and the company is real, and the 14 people who depend on it are real, and whatever mixture of grief and ambition and stubbornness and genuine skill went into building it, the thing that was built is solid and good and mine. I also want to say something to anyone watching this who is still in the middle of it, who hasn't had the confrontation yet, who is still at the table 16 phase, still swallowing it down, still performing patience and normality for an audience that doesn't deserve the performance. I want to say, you don't owe anyone your invisibility. You don't owe anyone the performance of being smaller than you are to make them more comfortable. The moment when you stand up, whenever it comes, whatever form it takes, whether it is in a ballroom in front of 300 people or in a quiet conversation at a kitchen table, that moment is available to you. It is not contingent on having a company. It is not contingent on having leverage. It is only contingent on knowing with enough clarity who you actually are. The leverage helped me in practical terms. The trust my grandmother left me gave me the financial security to make decisions from strength rather than fear. I won't pretend those things didn't matter. But the walk across that ballroom floor, that wasn't about leverage. That was about deciding, in one very clear moment, that I was done participating in a story that had been written about me by people who had never taken the time to read me carefully. That decision is available to everyone, regardless of what's in their bank account. My grandmother knew this. She spent her life making it quietly, repeatedly, in the ways available to her, arguing with my father on my behalf in conversations I never knew about, building a trust she told no one about, writing me a letter I didn't receive until she was gone, but that I will carry for the rest of my life. She made the decision to see me clearly and to act on what she saw when no one else in my family was willing to do either. That is the inheritance that mattered most. Not the $750,000, though I am grateful for it and I have used it well. The inheritance that mattered was 20 years of Sunday phone calls and a woman's voice telling me she could see exactly who I was and that it was enough. More than enough. That it was something worth watching carefully and investing in and being proud of. Find that person. If you don't have them in your family of origin, find them somewhere else. Build a life around people who see you as a whole person rather than as a supporting character in their own narrative. Those relationships are the real foundation. Everything else, the company, the revenue, the midnight blue dress and the grandmother's watch and the Harborview office, is just what gets built on top of it. And one last thing. I have been asked, in comments on earlier videos, whether I would do anything differently. Whether, knowing what I know now, I would have handled the confrontation differently. Whether there is part of me that wishes I had found a way toward reconciliation rather than separation. I have thought about this honestly, and my answer is, I don't think reconciliation was ever on offer. Not real reconciliation, the kind that requires both people to tell the truth and sit with the discomfort of it and decide together to try to do differently. My father is a man who, when presented with evidence of what he had done and given a room with no audience, could not bring himself to say the word sorry. Who moved, within about 20 minutes, from whatever small flicker of genuine feeling crossed his face when I told him I knew about my mother's trust, to asking what it would take to keep the business relationship intact. There is no path to reconciliation that doesn't start with honesty, and my father is not yet a person who can be honest with me about the choices he made. Perhaps that will change. I have no particular investment in whether it does or doesn't. What I know is that I cannot build my present or my future on the hope that someone will eventually become capable of treating me the way I deserved to be treated 20 years ago. That is not pessimism. That is clarity. And clarity, as it turns out, is an extraordinarily efficient foundation for a life. I am 33 years old. I am healthy. I have a company I am proud of, colleagues I trust, a therapist who challenges me, an uncle who tells me stories about my mother that make me laugh and cry in equal measure, and a grandmother who believed in me with the kind of faith that doesn't require proof. I have an office with a view of the harbor and a desk that is covered in the particular productive mess of someone who is genuinely engaged with the work they do every day. I have, at last, the life I was always going to build. It just took longer than it should have, and cost more than it needed to, because the people who were supposed to invest in me chose not to. But it is mine. All of it, every piece, every hard-won inch. It is mine, and it is enough, and it is more than they ever thought I was capable of. And I think somewhere in whatever form she continues in, my grandmother is watching and nodding and saying exactly what she always said. I know, sweetheart. I always knew you would. If you have stayed with me to the end of this story, thank you. Genuinely. This is not an easy thing to tell, and knowing you are listening means more than the numbers ever could. If something in this story found something in your own life, if it stirred something you have been carrying quietly or thinking about carefully or trying to figure out how to move through, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you are in the world. Tell me what you're building in the dark. Tell me you're here. And if you want to know what's happened in the months since that gala, the conversations I have had, the things I have learned about my family that I didn't expect, and the question my father asked me in a parking lot 3 months ago that I am still turning over, make sure you are subscribed and turn on notifications, because there is more to this story yet. Until next time, you are not what they called you. You are not the footnote in someone else's narrative. You are not the cautionary contrast that makes their success look more impressive. You are the main thing. You always were.